Welcome everyone to another FountainSide chat. Today, our guest is Patri Friedman, who runs Pronomos Capital, world's first charter city venture fund. He's been a leader in the competitive governance space for over 20 years, talking about ideas, big ideas, such as starting new countries as easily as we can start new companies. He also started the Seasteading Institute with funding from Peter Thiel, co-created Ephemeral, self-organizing festival on water, still running annually, and co-founded the Future Cities Development um, organization, which had the first MOU with Honduras in 2011 to start a charter city. Um, Welcome, Patri. It's a pleasure to have you. Awesome to talk to you every time. And such a pleasure to have you as a friend.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thanks for having me here.
Would love to hear how you got into all of this. What's the background, the origin story?
I mean, a lot of things about the charter city space, I feel like, are just applications of normal like startup and business thinking to governance, which very few other people apply it to. And so for me, it's the typical story of an unsatisfied customer, someone who wanted a product that didn't exist. And for me, the product was a country to live in that fit my values and that was run effectively. Like, I felt like it's not too much to ask that I get the level of service from my government that I do from, like, I don't know, a cell phone repair kiosk or earring store in the mall. But I don't. It's actually far, far worse, the service from government. And so it was those things that led me to start to explore this question of, like, why do governments perform so much worse than most of the other products and services that we get in our lives?
Um, was there any influence, of course, from your grandfather, Milton Friedman's ideas, then David Friedman's ideas? Like, was there some kind of continuation?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the ideas are all related. They're all trying to make societies that work better. My grandfather focused on specific policy suggestions, right? The idea that, maybe we don't have good policies because we don't have great ideas designed by economists and communicated well. And then we had public choice economics, which kind of analyzes the game theory of a government system like democracy and actually shows that it doesn't tend to pick good policies. That actually, if you like, the math says that governments should systematically favor special interests at the expense of broad ones. And so, my dad comes along, and now there's that, and says, well, maybe we need to design a different type of political system. And, is one of the co-creators of anarcho-capitalism. And there's some arguments in law and economics frameworks that it might do a lot better at producing laws that are to net benefit. Um, and so I guess it's like the hypothesis there is that the reason that we have bad policies is that we don't have governmental systems that produce good policies. But, there's, I would say, probably hundreds of thousands of people, maybe even millions, who are into anarcho-capitalism, would like to try it, and we can't. And so then I come along and it's like, well, okay, it's not that we need suggestions for better policies. It's not that we need political systems that pass better policies. We need a way to try out new proposed political systems in practice. Like, that's the missing link. I feel like my grandfather influenced me in looking at government with the tools of economics. There's a sense in which, my approach is public choice theory. It's just a different, kind of a different angle on public choice theory. And then for my dad, his work not just on ANCAP but on law and economics, and basically what it showed me is that people tend to think of politics from the lens of philosophy, morality, like what's good, and kind of assume away all of the implementation details. And it actually turns out in law and economics, with like some simplifying assumptions that are not perfect but are reasonable, that there is no way to turn a set of goals or a set of rights for a society into a set of rules and institutions that make that happen. They're like there is no process for doing that. An easy metaphor is just to say, like, is there a process for turning a description of a car on a piece of paper into a design to build that car? Like, obviously not. I could write down that it goes like 0 to 100 in 0.1 seconds and gets a billion miles to the gap. Like, writing a specification is not equivalent to even a proof of possibility, let alone a set of instructions. And so, if we view government as an engineering problem, then we think of it as a technology, and you realize that we need experiments, that it's not about finding the right, what's good and bad. It's not about defining that. It's not about alignment of that. Of course, the goals of a society, it's not that you can't structure to try to meet some goals. It's just that it's very imperfect and requires a lot of trial and error. So I'm not saying you shouldn't agree at all on the values, but that's only one step and not even close to the biggest step to creating a society. So definitely a lot more direct influence from my dad.
Amazing. Um, I see this. I appreciate that people are trying to reform existing systems, right? But there's a lot of that argument, voice, right, versus exit, which seems like so much better to not argue about what's better, just to try out and see what works better instead of just theoretically. And they have like 51% versus 49%, and nothing really can be tried out for a long term because then it gets overturned and all that, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like there's actually two different important things that you said there mixed together. One is theory versus practice, and they're like I'm strong on the side that like we have so much theory and so little practice. Like when people come to me with their new constitutions, right? Or here's my proposed mechanism to improve democracy or whatever. Like, okay, like, I used to geek out on that stuff too, but we actually have 10,000 of those ideas, and the next 10,000 add absolutely nothing. What we actually need is a way to put the best of the first 10,000 into practice. And then the other thing, voice versus exit. I mean, just the larger the group, the less voice you have, and the less well voice works. When you have 20 people, I think voice and talking things out and consensus works great. When you have 350 million, it barely works at all. And and the two are complementary. Like people will listen to your voice if you have the chance to exit, right? A customer is thinking of switching to another provider is someone you want to learn from and find out why and see if you can improve your product. So the two are related, and they're just, you know, I guess people think of them in opposition, but they're just two different tools for making things work better. And it's not that I think we should only have exit, but that it's very, very neglected. And it's a critical tool. Like it's just the larger and older a system is, the harder it is to reform it in place. In the technology world, the way that we get huge improvements is that teams look at a problem, come up with a new solution starting from a blank canvas, and implement that and get it to work with a small group of people and grow it. Like that's what makes better systems. Um, you know, yeah, like you know, we don't have VR because Palmer Luckey like convinced Nintendo to do a better job with their next headset, but because he invented the Oculus. Like, we don't have working social networks because Mark Zuckerberg helped Friendster with their tech, but because he started Facebook. Like, creating new things is the most important way that we get innovation.
Yeah, yeah. So a lot of people ask me like, why would you start a new city when you want to accelerate longevity, right? Um, why not just fund more research or um, create more of an environment in existing cities where people can matchmake and collaborate better or so on. And obviously there's this huge bottleneck in drug development in the uh, especially the later stages of drug development, clinical trials. And because of this, it takes billions of dollars and it takes decades to bring a new drug to market. Um, so maybe with you here, people can better understand um, how amazing it would be to create such a new city where we try out different regulatory systems. Um, and you personally, what's your relation to longevity? How did you get into it?
Um, I mean, I guess my dad and I are from like Bay Area transhumanist culture. He was on the Extropians list and the Cypherpunks list in the 90s. He took me to Extropian parties a few times when I was a kid. Um, and so I'm one of the people who sort of like doesn't understand why people wouldn't want the option to live forever. Like I just have no like intuition for like these opposing views. To me it's just like perfectly obvious that life is good and more life is more good, and those who don't want it don't have to have it, of course, but those who do want it should have the option. Like, you know, uh, or like cry almost signed up for cryo, and then like the freaking like the medical insurance to like pay for it, all this like documentation. I stalled out. I didn't have the bandwidth to do all that. Um, but like one of my children and her mom are signed up for cryo, so I I'm just yeah, I'm an old school Bay Area transhumanist, so all this stuff is like bread and butter for me.
Hmm. I'm curious. What does it say on your T-shirt?
It says, I'm actually quite tall for a hobbit.
Nice, nice, cool. All right, so you've seen a lot of startup city attempts over the more than 20 years that you've been in the space. What are top three failure modes that you've observed, and how can one avoid them? How can we avoid that with Viva.city?
Okay, there's a lot. Let's see. All right. One of them is counting on any one government and thinking that if things are going well with one country, that great, now I don't have to bother to talk to other ones. Working with countries is like working with a large business enterprise, a very large business enterprise. There's a great saying I heard, which is that birds fly, fish swim, and deals fall through. And so having a pipeline of different countries, having them feel a sense of competition against each other is critical. That's one of them. Um, Another is, I think one of the near enemies of doing this stuff is LARPing, meaning the sort of cargo cult of not doing the real thing, but doing things that look like it and are fun. Um, and it's just, starting new jurisdictions, new societies is both really, really fun, at least to certain people. It's cool, it's interesting. Like, who hasn't wanted to start their own country? Some people do it in their bedroom. Um, Although that's the LARPing, and it's incredibly hard. And when you have something that's really like fun idea and really really hard to do, it's just a constant temptation. I mean, temptation is the wrong word. It's just you'll find that if you do a bunch of different things, the ones that put out the cool idea and play with it are way easier and get way more traction than things that actually move you forward. And so, of course, our attention tends to go to the things that are working. And so it's just like almost like a black hole that's constantly pulling you towards, stimulating starting a city. That's the second one. I think the third one, well, I like being controversial. I'm kind of skeptical of the community focus that a lot of these projects have. I think communities is for L2s, and starting at like a charter city, like the lift of getting a government to pass national legislation, land use and all that, that's so heavy that you want to be building a city for, I don't know, 100,000 to millions of people, and that's hundreds or thousands of communities, not one community. And I just think that like the biggest driver of people moving to new places is economic opportunity. And I think that instead of community, like the economic basis for the city is what's going to make people actually move there. We've seen a number of projects, some current, that like the Free State Project, for example, it couldn't get 20,000 people to move to a different U.S. state. Like it's really hard to get people to move places unless there's significantly better jobs there. So it's not that community isn't one aspect, but and of course it all depends on how strong and intense the community is. If you have a community of people who are remote workers that are like, we will move wherever together if you can get a deal, okay, that's strong enough. But anything short of that, like I think focusing on what industries are going to be there, on anchor tenants, on like what is the initial value creation engine is much more of the bottleneck.
Love all three. And also on the third one, I gotta say, if there were a lot of layer ones, I would build just a layer two and bring the longevity community. And
Yeah.
sometimes you just gotta vertically integrate. And also, I think the pitch of this is my controversial opinion, where maybe we disagree. I think the pitch of a charter city, even though it sounds good to us and a lot of people, it sounds bad to countries. So you're saying you're going to a country and saying, give us this jurisdiction. We're going to do governance better than you because we know better, right? You guys are doing.
I would never say that.
Yeah, but like that's kind of what that's sometimes that's how it comes across, right? And it might not be spoken. Even they might not realize that that's what you're saying. But in the somehow they have to pitch it to their people and say we're doing this zone because they're going to do all these other things as a city. My pitch is it's a medical innovation zone, right? We're bringing a tier one hospital,
Sure.
all this investment.
Oh, I'm not saying don't pitch industries. I think industry clusters is essential to starting, to starting new cities. Yeah, so agree with you there.
And then regarding community, I mean, yeah, we just gotta vertically integrate. If you just start with a physical location, we've seen, for example, with Prospera, right? They had a physical location, and then there was almost nobody there until we came in and brought Vitaly brought hundreds of people.
Yes.
So you do need both. It's hard to have both aspects in the same company or the same group or team. And also,
yeah, I also think the skill, like the community building skills and the dealing with nation state skills are quite different. Of course, you can have multiple people on your team. And, I think that developing communities to be in the city is like a great business development thing to do. I just think it's about like many communities to make one city. And so kind of the level of that in your org chart and kind of where it fits in needs to match that.
yeah. And when you look at it, Prospera and others have been in places where people want a lot of economic opportunity, and they had this better framework. They also had jobs, but people were just coming in doing the jobs and not really living there, and it didn't become a city, right? Um, I think it's not enough. I think not only do we have this like life and death kind of motivation. It's not just the libertarian thing where, oh, I'm going to move to New Hampshire because it's going to become libertarian. Like, it's very hard to kind of upend your life and
Yeah.
your house and go somewhere else for like not really a super clear reason. For
Yeah.
our community, it's like, this is life and death for us. Like, if we don't create such a jurisdiction, if we don't accelerate clinical trials with this feedback loop of like, decade or so for every new drug, we know we're not going to make it. And also for a lot of entrepreneurs, right? It's the only way they can actually bring their drugs to market much faster because pharma doesn't get this new approach to medicine of targeting aging itself instead of managing symptoms of Alzheimer's and cancer and heart disease and so on. And the other thing is, I haven't seen a big community be grown and given value to. So we've seen with Vida for example, that we can have a big online community that can actually align for collective action. Um, and then we brought people in person and so on. What we remain to see is if, and I do think we can, um, we have a lot of interest from governments create such a special jurisdiction. So I do feel like there's the whole vertical integration, and the key here is having a lot of people online, but also bringing them in person for pop-up gatherings where they try out how it feels like to live there. Right, that's a huge thing because if you have a location, there's a chicken and egg problem, right? People don't want to move until other people want to move, right? But they might come for
Yes.
a conference, but a conference doesn't really give you a taste of what it'd be like to live there. So a
I mean,
too
it's
much gathering.
something. I think I think the pop-ups are a lot better than nothing as far as like being an early part of your sales pipeline. But I think that the people who will go live someplace for a month are the people who are more mobile, or you might also think of it as rootless, who are actually the least likely to settle down in a place for the long term. I mean, I'm a single parent, and I don't live in Prospero because there's no friends for my teenager there. Um, and I can't go for someplace for a month. I love going to pop-up cities for a week. uh, but there's yeah, I think that we kind of still haven't figured out exactly what the connection is between pop-ups and long-term residency. And like it's not that it's bad, like it's better than nothing. It does something, but I don't think that they're as tightly connected as some people seem to think.
Yeah, so Vitalik Buterin has this graphic where you have this online community, and then what? And then you have a new society. And so he's like, okay, then you have this online community, and then you do a pop up, and then there's still something missing until you have a permanent new society and new city, right? So I think another step in that gap is these permanent hubs. So you don't just bring people temporarily to a special jurisdiction. You don't just bring people temporarily together in their in existing major cities. You create these embassies, as we call them, places where people can um, congregate in their city and grow the community in person as well. And that's where you don't have only nomads. And I disagree that in pop-up cities there are only nomads. There are a lot of entrepreneurs that are looking to um, start their biotech startups in this jurisdiction because they see a gap. They see some this new approach to medicine that isn't really recognized by the traditional drug development world, right? Um, and yes, not everyone would move, but a percentage would. And if you keep bringing cohorts there, at least even the people that move will move because they have always a lot of people
Yeah.
around there, a lot of cool people. Even if those people not necessarily stay, there's always fresh people coming. So
Yeah, I
the
mean, I think you want a mix of, of longer term and transient people. That's great. And I just think that getting the longer term people is a lot harder. And when getting the transient people, it's like you're putting some energy into like the easy part, and what you really need is to solve the hard part.
yeah, yeah. And it makes it easier to bring the longer term people, especially even if you have thousands of people that only stay a bit. There's always thousands of people there, right? It's just keep coming, keep having new people, and you filter them. They're awesome. So people are like, yeah, this is way better than the place I was living in before, and I want to grow roots here, and I can build my business too. I can save my life and everyone's life, by solving aging. It's it seems like a no-brainer for a lot of us. We just need to actually implement this, and it hasn't really happened. Um, what places do you recommend that? Um, I mean, if you can say, some countries that we should focus more on.
I'm very bullish on Africa in general for a few reasons. One is I think it has the most headroom in the sense of like untapped potential. Population is young and growing. Like they need more housing. Like they need more places and better places to live. You're not trying to convince people to, move from Berlin or the Bay, or something. That's a lot of my focus. I also think, with the legal issues that Prospera has, I think a lot of people are just viewing it as like, yes, sometimes the governments turn against you, but I actually don't think that's right. I think the deal is that Honduras elected a Marxist, and the Marxist views Prospera as her direct ideological opponent, and I think that she's right. And there's just way less Marxism in Africa. It's just that there's left and right there, and there's plenty of issues. There's plenty of corruption and bad governance, but this sort of like, you know, anyone doing business and trying to grow the economy is evil and like actually just trying to like kill us all, um, kind of like virulent philosophy is actually much rarer in other parts of the world, including in Africa. So I think that's important. But in general, like small countries is where it's at. Um, the difference between working with a democracy that's less than a million people and one that's more than 10 million, more than 100 million is just massive in terms of how long it takes to get things done. smaller countries are more like startups, and big countries are more like massive industry leaders. And of course you have to look at like where your industries will flourish, where your population is willing to move, travel links. You know, now that I'm working in West Africa, I realize how incredible the travel links to Roatan are. There's like 6+ daily direct flights to the U.S., which is actually incredible for people visiting, for people who are moving there who need to be able to visit the States. So things like travel links are very important.
Mm, yeah. So you kind of started with from the seasteading aspects first, right?
Yeah, that was V1.
V1. Okay. So tell us more. How has your thinking evolved since the concept of seasteading and now with charter cities?
Yeah, I mean, the general framework of looking at governments like businesses and law as code and trying to bring startup jurisdictions and the goal of eventually making startup countries is all the same. It's kind of the approach. In the 2000s, when I started the ideas of seasteading ephemeral in 2001, countries were not at all willing to authorize things like charter cities. Dubai hadn't really prospered yet. Shenzhen was still pretty new and growing, and special economic zones were, they were catching on, but kind of not big enough and proven enough, and everyone was still stuck in 20th century thinking. And startup cities are very 21st century thinking, entrepreneurial and dynamic, and weren't open to it. And so the ocean, the legal system on the ocean is actually much more competitive, where a ship registers with a country in their flag registry and flies their flag. It's essentially like a floating embassy. When you're outside 12 nautical miles, except for resources, which are still governed by the coastal state, that ship is now essentially under the sovereignty, franchising the sovereignty of whatever country it registers with. And you can change your registration every year if you want. And so it's actually this competitive market, which makes it easy to start without permission. You can start just as a flagged ship, and when you grow big enough, you can negotiate with the country for a custom flagging agreement. It was a fine idea at the time, but the ocean is just very difficult, very expensive. A lot of it is very remote, and so yeah, I think now that we can build on land, land is better. But like the underlying frameworks are all the same.
There's this guy Rocco, and he has this idea of ice steading, right? Like take
Yes, I know
iceberg.
Rocco.
Um,
Yeah, but I mean, if they get people to move to Roatan, do you really think they're going to move to an iceberg? It's actually it's a perfectly solid idea as far as like the physics and economics of it. Like it doesn't cost very much to insulate an iceberg and keep it going, and it is like new unclaimed land. But you know, from a from like an international law perspective, it has the same issue as building like an island or a fixed platform, which is that ships are under this flag registry system of admiralty law because they move. And things that don't move are generally claimed by the nearest coastal state. So you don't actually get the, kind of like these legal benefits. You have to negotiate with the government for it the same way you do for a charter city, which you could build someplace that has airports and hospitals.
hmm. Yeah, would love to see questions from the audience and just actually just discussion as well. Um, so if you would like, raise your hand. Um, Meanwhile, there's one other thing. There's this Chinese Zhanjia. What? How do you say?
Yeah, genre, progression
Zhanjia.
fantasy.
Literature. Yeah. So, why do you recommend that? Especially for people on transhumanism and longevity, um, and so on. Like, why should people read?
I've been shocked that it's not way more popular in transhumanist communities, especially since there's a lot of Asian influence in those communities. So it's a genre of literature that's set in a Chinese fantasy world with martial arts, where you can think of it as like there's all of these levels of power. Like imagine a ladder with 100 levels of power where each one is 3 times as strong as the one before. And so these stories start with like a peasant in a small village who works their way up to being the strongest in their village, the strongest in their city, the strongest in their country, the strongest in their continent, the strongest in their world, and then they move to other worlds, and they're just constantly like hustling and grinding to get stronger. And one of the major goals of getting stronger in the Chinese ones is always immortality. It's I want as you ascend these ladders of power, your lifespan increases, and it sometimes becomes a race. Like, am I stuck at a bottleneck where I can't improve my like martial arts core in time to get the lifespan to do it more, which of course is a problem that we also have. And then when you reach a certain point, you're immortal, and even from there, you get stronger and stronger so that you can challenge the gods themselves and change the natural order of things to protect yourself and your loved ones. So it's just this world, and it's not just the immortality, but the hustle. Like I contrast it with Western comic books, where like what you're strong because you got bit by a spider. Like in Janja, it's like just you're grinding and training and taking calculated risks, and of course, there's getting lucky is always a big part of it. But so is the hustle, and these people are just dedicated to like I'm going to put my time into getting stronger, into getting better. So I find it just very like virtuous and inspiring.
Nice. Francesca is the first.
Hello, good morning, everyone. Hi, Patrick. I wanted to ask you, in the quest, right, of being in this space, many have kind of looked at Brian Johnson, his rejuvenation protocol. What is that you have adopted in your personal protocol or in your personal practice to support your journey? Meanwhile, more therapies are discovered.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I'm the best person to ask this. I often do these things because they're fun. For example, I'm very excitedly waiting for the development at Prospera of a glowing LED implant that I'm going to get under my skin. Which is not going to extend my longevity, but just seems really fun. But I've done the mini circle follistatin treatment. I do a lot of intermittent fasting and eat fairly like keto, paleo. I run and lift when I have the energy. But I find it tough because for so many of these things, like so many supplements and protocols, like I don't feel anything. And, I generally kind of like low bandwidth, high demands in my life. And I just find it hard to like motivate myself to, be taking a supplement and doing a routine when I can't tell that it works. So I'm really looking forward to better devices for like monitoring the effects of things that you're doing, and, implants that look at your bloodstream and get you, continuous readouts on micronutrients and things like that. I think that I would do a lot more if I could see it working. I also just kind of personally have health issues with poor sleep my whole life that I've done a lot of work on, and it's still not great. And so I wish I was at a place where I was focused on longevity. I mean, I'm interested in things like Deprinyl, um, metformin, uh, that type of stuff, but unfortunately, still have more basic stuff to work on.
We
Interesting.
we
Thank
are
you for
so
sharing.
we are social animals, right? And so that's another aspect we didn't really touch on, how amazing it is to live with like-minded people, even without a special jurisdiction. But of course, we need it for the ultimate um, goal to accelerate longevity biotech. But even meanwhile, and we need to accelerate longevity biotech because most people, a lot of people might not really fully grasp this, but you can have the perfect diet and sleep and exercise and all these supplements that make you feel good. You're still going to age and degenerate and die. So we need way more advanced biotechnology. Um, but that said, of course, we want to be healthier. We want to feel better. We're more productive when we do all those things and take care of ourselves. And it's so much easier when you're with like-minded people, when you see others exercising and going to bed on time, and the lights are turning red with the night and all that stuff. It's also, when you are a lot of people, you basically sort of not crowdfund, right? But because there are a lot of people there, any restaurant that's there, because there's the demand for healthy food, the restaurant is going to make healthy food. um, you don't even need to do it yourself. We did, of course, had to make our own menu and like convince the chef and Zuzalu and Vitalia and so on to make all this healthy stuff. But long term, right, when you just have a lot of people, the market, that people will choose the healthy restaurant and not the unhealthy one if you have those like-minded people, so it will work out. And so it's so much easier. Otherwise, I it's very hard to eat healthy, to find out what restaurants, or to cook for myself or so on. But if everyone eats healthy and there's nothing unhealthy around, it's just healthy by default. um, it's like habit engineering as well. And
Hmm.
so any yeah, Victoria.
Yeah, hello. Hi, Patri.
Hey,
Great conversation. Great to have you. Thank you for your insights. I would love to hear your thoughts on what kind of governance structure or incentives do you think are essential for like attracting top biotech or longevity talent if we have a new special jurisdiction?
I think that I've been coming to think lately that the kind of like autonomy and regulatory stuff is actually a lot less important at the beginning. Although I think it is very important, like over the years and decades. Like at the beginning, you need to have an economy. So you need to bring in an industry cluster, and really it's about whatever they need. And a lot of it is not the regulatory carve-outs, although that's like a piece of the value offering. It's understanding like what it would take for them to open whatever, an R&D facility, or for your community to bring their startups to a place, and kind of like herding cats and building momentum. And I kind of feel like the power of a good regulatory system is that it like boosts growth like permanently. And so there's this compounding effect where, whatever the difference between a place growing at 5% and 8%, like over decades, the 8% place is going to be 2 to 4 times as big over several decades. But at the beginning, it's not much. And that the hard part is like kicking off that economic engine at all, as opposed to like whether it's low friction and growing fast. But I've seen companies in this space like make the mistake of thinking that they can like reason out this type of thing. And in my opinion, like any startup that's developing a new product, the answer is talk to your customers, talk to your potential customers, and find out their needs. And it should be all about that, like customer development and market research, as opposed to like my or anyone else's opinions.
I think if you go somewhere and build a community at the start of a city, but you don't yet have the special jurisdiction, it's gonna be very hard because you lose your leverage, right?
I'm not saying don't have it. I'm saying that it's not the primary thing that powers the economy in the beginning.
Yeah. Okay. Makes sense. Cool.
So would you say the community and the cultural shift would be first to come and then build on top of that? Is that something you have in
I
mind?
think it's the economy. Like, who are the people who will move here and bring businesses and employ people, and what do they need to do that? And one community is might be one draw, right? The answer might be, I want to live around a bunch of other people who are living healthy and working on making death optional. Like, that could be the answer, but it would have to come out of talking to them, and they would have to say that, and then it would still be just one ingredient of bringing them there.
Yeah, makes sense.
If you look at data on why people move, both in the developed and developing world, like being around like-minded people or anything having to do with values is like not a top 5 reason. It's like less than 10% of people. Number 1 is economic opportunity, and number 2 is family reunification, which is another reason that I'm focused on building for locals. And I think that, at least for my projects, which are mainly focused on on much lower tech industries like agriculture, I look at well, after the locals, I want to be drawing amazing people from the region and helping create a reverse diaspora where now that there's economic opportunity in your homeland, the people who left for opportunity in the developed world can come back. We've seen this happen with El Salvador, when Bukele 1%ed the murder rate. And so there, people are actually getting family reunification out of it, rather than moving further from their families. And, long term, what I want is like-minded tribes living together. That's what I'm in this for. I'm just not sure that we can do it at the scale that these cities are now. And we may need to get scale by building for locals, before we're able to have cities that bring tribes together. But we'll see. Different people trying different things is great.
I do think the longevity aspect, especially as we're not just building that one city and asking people come here, and so there's the pop-up gathering that helps with a bit of that chicken and egg. It's been amazing for people. It's been life-changing. There's also the online community that allows us to have more reach. There's also these in-person hubs like the Frontier Tower in San Francisco, which I hope you can visit soon, where we can gather in a permanent hub, right? And people can sort of get a bit of a taste of what it will be like in the frontier. But most importantly, a cultural shift in the whole world is what we're building towards. Also with Jellyfish DAO creating movies, like Hollywood mainstream movies, inspiring people with stories, not with arguments, about a world without aging. So as this becomes more of a movement, I do think we'll have more and more people who are ideologically aligned, and I know usually ideology is not a top reason people move, and I do think in this case it might be an exception because it's life and death.
Hope so.
Yeah. Cool. Any final question before I ask my closing question that I like to ask always now for these FountainSide chats? Go ahead. I think JP, did you unmute or no? Cannot see. All right. So my closing question would be, who else would you like to see on a future FountainSide chat? Like, who would you even like to hang out in this new city, Viva.city, on the side of the fountain and chat with?
I don't know. I mean, I feel like I'd like to meet and hear from new people who I don't know. So that contradicts my having suggestions. You go to a bunch of these events, you see a lot of the same people, and they're great. But we definitely need more and new voices.
Okay, what kind of person? What do you think we're missing?
Maybe people who are more intellectually and culturally diverse. Who, I mean, when I look at this Asian fiction, it's wow, there's this whole world of people who are obsessed with longevity and immortality, that and I'm only in touch with these ideas because I happened upon this fiction genre. I feel like there's a lot of people out there who are not from Bay Area transhumanist culture who are also into longevity, and the more different subcultures we can draw from, the bigger the movement will be.
Nice.
Someone from Taiwan.
Yeah, I mean, we do have some people from Taiwan coming to these gatherings and pop-up cities.
Wonderful.
Yeah, I saw I saw JP unmuted and but maybe it didn't work. If it still doesn't work, then It's been a pleasure having you, Patri. Um, hope to have more of these. Always a pleasure to talk to you.
Yeah, likewise.